Chapter 15, Demo and Retro, or Sprint Review, Demo, Demonstration, and Retro, Retrospective, or Sprint Review. Sprint Retrospective. Sprint Review, Demo. Product owner watches a user complete each user story the team committed to in this sprint, accepts or rejects each as meeting their definition of done. This is actually old information. Now a product owner or whoever's playing that role or a team accountability will check definition of done as anything's completed during the sprint. And sprint review is a celebration with the customer where the customer uses it. But still, if your team is not yet releasing in 30 days or faster, yes, start sprint review by showing the product owner approving each item like a stamp. But this should be replaced with continuous delivery and continuous release as soon as you can for a faster feedback loop. The team sets up the product or service increment so the user can use it and rehearses with the users. The Scrum Master facilitates, picks music, maybe caters, maybe decorates, prepares by inviting key stakeholders, investors, more types of users, records impediments they observe or infer. Cannot start until the team has a potentially shippable product increment that meets the product owner's definition of done. Is done when the product owner has rejected or accepted all the work in the sprint backlog as meeting their definition of done. Now, again, that's antiquated. Now it's actually done when the customer has used each piece that was delivered that sprint and the team has gotten feedback from watching the customer actually use it. Looks like actual users using the product or service. Time box, 2 hours per every week of sprint length. Now that is a maximum. Since sprint review is just watching the customer use it, it needs to be short to keep their excitement. A good sprint review is 5 minutes or less. Then with as much conversation afterwards, more feedback, product backlog refinement, etc. But the actual review, the actual customer using the product is intended to be now 5 minutes or less. In fact, it was originally intended to be that at MIT's Media Lab where demo came from. At sprint finish, the last day of the sprint, the teams all attempt to use all modules and product that was newly completed this sprint. Modules are integrated with each other and other connecting products. The goal is to create a shared understanding across the entire group Agile of what was completed within the rhythm of the sprint. Teams can host those individually first and then integrate for an integrated group sprint review. Or teams can skip directly to the group sprint review if they are not experiencing frequent failures to meet the definition of done during the group Agile sprint review. As a result of knowing what newly meets the definition of done, the teams can update the group burn down chart. The group burn down chart is the most important chart for investment and payroll. The group burn down chart, as introduced in Chapter 9, Plan, Release Plan, has a y-axis that is the entire project estimate to achieve a release. A release is something the teams believe will create new capabilities in the world and create value for their customers and group. Here we will provide a partial list of possible releases. A new car model on sale in the market that achieves something the company has never been able to accomplish before. Now, this is possible. Wikispeed has done this. A new rocket engine with updated automated assembly and automated testing in the assembly machines. SpaceX does this every 2 days now. New Raptor engines. So these are new pipes, new nozzle diameters, new alloys, new suppliers being used for different parts, new rocket pumps, new electronics, and new software every 2 days. So this is possible. Some companies are doing it right now. A new wearable headset with better noise canceling and a lighter form factor and the same battery life as the previous model. A major wearable electronics maker has done this. An entire new business unit owning its own finances like an in-house product with their first product sold. GE, General Electric, has done this as part of GE FastWorks, their Agile spinoff that they created to test Agile, fully owned by GE, but not beholden to any of the policies in GE. For more information on that, see the next chapter, chapter 16, Switch, how to switch a legacy or traditional company to Agile. A block of 10,000 research tasks completed to whittle away the number of solutions that do not work for inertial models of autonomous driving to reduce jitter. Tesla has done this. They're way faster than that now. So I'll highlight this to try to make it more contemporary. A new version of a mobile micro banking service that allows for sub 5-minute home purchase mortgage applications in more countries than before, complete with legal and regulatory approval. Several banks and fintechs have done this. It is important that these releases include testing. A sprint that does not include testing, such as only planning, has no feedback loop to inspect and adapt the product or the end-to-end process. For more reasoning on why a sprint includes a tested product available for customer feedback and use, please see Chapter 4, JETS. The sprint review, also called sprint demo or sprint demonstration, is ideally actually using the thing in the market. This would be the rocket launch and see if the mission was successful or not. Preparing for this, the teams conduct all regression tests, hopefully automated, as these are frequently repeated and time-consuming. To reduce the risk, the new functionality has broken existing functionality. These sprint reviews must include regulations and compliance measures. In the words of the United States Food and Drug Administration, quote, "The development process depicted in the example is a traditional waterfall model. The design proceeds in a logical sequence of phases or stages. Basically, requirements are developed and a device is designed to meet those requirements. The design is then evaluated, transferred to production, and the device is manufactured. In practice, feedback paths would be required between each phase of the process and previous phases, representing the iterative nature of product development." What the FDA has just said here is they provide a visual example in the law, the published law, saying here is a waterfall diagram of plan, analyze, build, test, deploy in a sequence. But in reality, there will be iterations between all of these for real product development. And they get even more hard line in the next excerpt from the current law, the Food and Drug Administration law. This is for embedded medical devices in humans, this type of thing. Although the waterfall model is a useful tool for introducing design controls, its usefulness in practice is limited. The model does apply to the development of some simpler devices. However, for more complex devices, a concurrent engineering model is more representative of the design processes in use in the industry. What's being said here is concurrent engineering, where you have plan, analyze, build, test, deploy simultaneously, and the phases don't end, which is what Tesla does now, part of what Tesla does now. That's what's actually happening. And the FDA is saying that's legal, that's allowed. In fact, that's normal. Now, the document that says what process you used, did you use waterfall? Did you use concurrent engineering? Did you use an agile method? If so, which one? That document is called the device history file. And the FDA then is even more hardcore here. The primary beneficiary of the device history file is the device manufacturer, end quote. The FDA says, look, that file's for you, saying what process you used. That's not the point. We're here to ensure health and safety. So show us what process you did use, whatever it was, so we can understand how you ensured health and safety. The FDA does not mandate waterfall. In fact, they're quite strict, saying waterfall's application in practice is limited. It may be appropriate for some simpler devices. That's FDA design control guidance for medical device manufacturers. FDA 21 Code of Federal Regulations 820.30, and subclause 4.4 of ISO 9001. These quotations are presented here to show that some regulating bodies expect concurrent engineering and iterations. Further, the USA Food and Drug Administration specifies that some types of documentation are for the benefit of the company creating the product and not the primary concern of the credentialing body for purposes of determining compliance. The ultimate goal is to meet the definition of done, whether that be for effectiveness or safety or interoperability or ease of use or cost control or a mix of all of the above. The fastest path to achieve the definition of done for a Scrum Master is concurrent execution of modules by multiple teams in group agile. The teams work iteratively, involving the credentialing authority for the fastest responsible product success. Documentation is iteratively produced every sprint, and certification officials are invited in every sprint. Process waivers are requested. Process waivers allow a faster recertification, and for recertification to require only revalidation of the areas that changed this sprint. Process waivers are often granted if the product company implements thorough automated testing and builds a track record of quality sprint reviews. This is how SpaceX rockets are different every single week, and no two rocket engines or rockets have ever been the same. This is the same mechanism used by Saab Aeronautics and Saab Defense to fly new versions of the Gripen multi-role joint strike fighter each sprint. The purpose of sprint review is also to build excitement from stakeholders. Stakeholders may be investors, customers, purchasers, influencers, users, influencers into purchasing decision, employees, potential future employees, etc. The sprint demo in use of the actual product is ideally thoroughly exciting. Okay, let me rewind for a moment. I'm always asked at least once a week currently, how do you deal with certification in fast product release cycles? I just tried to share in the book what is working. First, the company automates as many of the tests that the certifying body will request as they can. This allows them to have fast feedback loops as they try and learn, test and learn, with rapid feedback on what are likely to be the final certification tests. They can run internal sprints this way. Now, ideally, these sprints have full external certification as well. So the company will then invite the credentialing authority to those sprint reviews and say, what other questions would you have asked if we applied for final certification right now? And they'll get questions that then become additional internal tests, ideally automated for speed. Then the company will request waivers. Can we recertify only the aspects of the product that changed? In the last release, we changed only this piece out of these 12 pieces. Can we constrain the scope of recertification to only this piece? None of the other pieces changed. Sometimes that's responsible, and the credentialing authority will grant that waiver. That waiver allows for a dramatically simpler review process. Now, even fewer internal tests must be automated and must be run in order to show compliance. But ideally, you have automated tests covering all aspects of the product anyway for unanticipated issues that could arise. Then, if your sprint reviews have been exciting enough, which is the second point that I just tried to make, the compliance official wants to come each sprint review. And if your sprint reviews are exciting enough and you're answering all their questions each time they show up, they say, well, what about regression testing in this area? And you say, oh, we've been running these automated in this way for the last 18 months. Here's the information we have on our variants, and we haven't detected any problems so far. Here's the accuracy of our testing procedure. You may get spot certification from some agencies. They may certify you right then. Also, if you give a product to a certifying agency every 4 years, 7 years, you're going to need to provide hundreds or even thousands of pages of documentation, or at least you think you need to. The certifying official is going to take a long time to digest that information and then ask for additional information where they have questions or need clarifications for safety and health reasons. If you have 1 week's worth of changes and ask for those to be certified, that might be a 1-page document, potentially, responsibly. Maybe there's boilerplate for many more pages that are required. Those might be not required if you do that 100 times in a row, 2 years. You may then have a very fast certification path, and that is what these companies are doing. That's similar to what Tesla is doing, but I think I talked about that earlier in the book. Then, about sprint review being exciting, quote, "The value of life can be measured by how many times your soul has been deeply stirred," end quote. Soichiro Honda, founder and CEO, Honda Motor Corporation. Customers should cheer if they can, and Scrum teams should be cheering too. This guidance helps the team create the sprint goal and sprint backlog during product backlog refinement and sprint planning. Amazon, one of the wealthiest companies in the world by market capitalization at the time of this writing, uses a press release method to achieve this effect. Team release goals are worked on by the team in a mob. The team authors a press release that would be true if the release were successful. The team then creates the leanest, simplest backlog that is likely to make the press release true. And ultimately, the press release is released at the sprint review. This approach also lets the Scrum teams know which of their stakeholders to invite to which sprint review. All 5 events in Scrum are open to all in the company who have security clearance. And ideally, that's everybody for speed reasons. Security clearance, if necessary, is as broadly distributed as possible in order to maximize collaboration and innovation. Speed is the ultimate competitive advantage, and more transparency creates more speed. Specific invitations are created for the stakeholder group most likely to be most excited by this sprint's review. Scrum teams track this through personas. More on this in our seminar and book, Product Owner, www.abi-agile.com/en/book. Inside healthy and fast organizations, everyone in the team mobs, working together. This includes sending invitations to sprint reviews, iterating the relationships with suppliers to reduce costs and increase speed, and determining if the current extra small project meets the definition of done. Scrum provides a way to get started even before team engagement and collective ownership has increased to this level. In the really fast companies I've had a chance to consult to or join or be an employee in, there's this feeling of team spirit, and the team is permeable. People can trade and move around. There's not like we're the X team and we don't like other teams. We are a team that's excited and motivated and open and welcoming. This is common across all the high-performing companies I've had an opportunity to work with or work inside or be an employee of. Even before that emerges, Scrum is this awesome stepping stone to take from a culture where people prefer to work alone, where people cover their mistakes, and where people sub-optimize the larger company advantage for political reasons, where they try to get an individual advantage at the expense of the larger company advantage, which is what we call political behavior as opposed to optimum behavior in a company. To move from that towards this hyper-productive, closer to utopia, Scrum is this phenomenal stepping stone. You have this team-based structure that tries to become more and more T-shaped and collaborative. And often they'll vote to mob, which shares skills really quickly. That's what I was trying to say there when I say Scrum provides a way to get started, even before team engagement and collective ownership has increased to this amazing level that I tried to describe just now. The product owner is the person accountable for project finances, what is considered done, and providing the correct stakeholders to and inviting the correct stakeholders to each sprint review to keep them excited and incrementally funding the project. Mature Agile organizations often retire the product owner role altogether, simply rotating through someone in the team to attend Meta Scrum when called, and therefore keep the known stable interface between teams. Incremental funding. During our Scrum Master seminars, more and more organizations are asking how to pay staff. We would like to recommend one possible model that addresses many morale issues, which scales to large organizations and is robust, even in a crisis, when severe cost cutting and austerity may be necessary. The amount of funding coming is transparently shared across the teams who are invited to do the work. The teams are asked in Metascrum, which of the funded goals are they most excited about? And or which funded goals do they have the skills to deliver most efficiently? The teams self-organize around goals and then trade players between themselves to rebalance. The funding allocated to each goal is then divided equally by the number of headcount that signed up for each goal. If the funding level is reduced or increased, the team's income is adjusted in real time accordingly. Funding is never released for partially completed work, but only when a sub-goal, an extra small project that is usable and solves a problem, is completed by meeting its definition of done. When funds are released, the project is paid, and the funds are distributed equally to all who have their names written on the group Agile board for that goal. Funds disbursement always occurs after all expenses, which are visible on the group Agile board. Expenses are the team burn rate, which includes line items such as salary, equipment, leases, external consultants when necessary, machinery, etc. In this way, the team is incented to have the lowest expenses while achieving the funding milestone the most quickly, while meeting the required quality bar or definition of done, while using the least and best headcount from the pool they are able to attract. It is a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle. The group sprint review is the funding release event. In a crisis or time of financial austerity, the money coming in is still visibly distributed across the highest priority projects just as before. The number of projects funded and the amount of funding are likely reduced. This means teams will continuously reorganize around goals at either lower funding levels or opt out of the company, but no one needs to be laid off. Companies using this strategy during COVID-19 business austerities of 2020 reported higher employee engagement, sense of purpose, morale, and speed of execution. Those were some of my clients. Sprint retrospective. So that was all sprint review. And that's really everything I wish everyone knew about sprint review. Make it super exciting. That is what earns incremental funding. You can tie incremental funding to it directly. And in fact, I recommend it if the holders of the purse are already on board with Agile. That's closer to how it works at Tesla. Then you don't have to have a multi-year release for compliance reasons. Many compliance authorities are happy to work on shorter cycles. Okay, the second part, sprint retrospective. This happens right after sprint review, and it's where we choose how are we going to have a faster, more fun, higher quality, more valuable release, next release, which we would call sprint. How's our next sprint going to be better, faster, cheaper, more fun? And we do it right after sprint review because this is the point we know the most. The developers have just seen the customer use the last increment. They know the very most at this moment. So they go directly to sprint retrospective. And originally these were the same meeting, but they were split years ago because Esther Derby asked for it. And maybe that was a good reason. Is done when the Scrum team has chosen one experiment to become happier or faster and committed to execute the experiment within the next sprint. Sprint retrospective was originally the same event as sprint review. Both were simply called sprint demo and executed together. Soon after, Agile coaches found value in focusing on both events separately in order to ensure teams developed the habit of actually using their work with real customers to get feedback and then inspecting and adapting the way they worked in the last sprint to produce continuous improvement. Teams that have been working with their Scrum Masters for many sprints will often have no trouble achieving both these goals each sprint and can remerge these two events or do them continuously throughout the sprint and not only at the sprint end. Sprint retrospective has one purpose: to identify the top improvement that is likely to increase happiness and speed with quality in the next sprint. These retrospectives can be run in each Scrum team at the group Agile level and even across teams or companies with their suppliers. In fact, I recommend doing it at all levels, but these should be fast. You're not doing work usually during a sprint retrospective, so these should be fast. If they're fast, so we don't have much time taken away from real work, these can be run at the team level, team of teams level, product level if your products are big and have many teams, product group level, and company and suppliers level. And they're phenomenally effective, especially if they're facilitated well and rehearsed in advance by Scrum Masters who are passionate and skillful. To help sprint retrospective be effective, we first want to share information with as little opinion as possible. We accomplish this through the sprint review, with everyone who will take part in the sprint retrospective observing real customers try to complete a real mission with the real product in production. Now we are at the point in the sprint where everyone knows the most about what our product can and cannot do. Those who did the work on the product then retrospect to determine what they could do in the next sprint to be happier and faster while doing the work next sprint. There are dozens of formats and methods to successfully run retrospectives, some requiring accessories and some requiring online tools, and some only needing a whiteboard or a virtual whiteboard or no tools at all. Scrum Masters may ask anyone to facilitate the sprint retrospective. However, the Scrum Master must be prepared to facilitate the sprint retrospective themselves as well, or to teach others how to do it. Each type of retrospective uncovers certain types of impediments. A beginning Scrum Master will rotate through retrospective types to try to continuously catch the highest value impediments to fix or process improvement to implement. An expert Scrum Master will have been rapidly implementing every process improvement they are able to find every day of the sprint. If an expert Scrum Master needs team or group buy-in and support to resolve a systemic impediment, they will purposefully choose the retrospective type that makes the opportunity visible to everyone, thereby creating the buy-in and support they need to solve the problem in the next sprint. For a list of several retrospective types and how and when to run them, we recommend the book Agile Retrospectives: Making Good Teams Great by Diana Larson and Esther Derby. Also, most Agile gatherings and conferences and lean coffees around the world will have a Scrum Master track where sprint retrospective techniques are taught and practiced, and an open space where attendees can ask to learn and practice or share retrospective techniques. In our Scrum Master seminar, we will teach at least one retrospective type. As this is a master class, we will present 6 with notes on use and facilitation for each. All examples should include a step of unpacking the retrospective. Unpacking is where the facilitator reads or shares all the cards to create shared understanding. Unpacking the retrospective always starts with the positives first, then neutral, and finally negatives or gaps. Then votes are taken on what the team most wants to do something about, to address negative things they want to change, and positive things to amplify or improve. The first 2 methods Joe Justice uses to create the initial backlog for an executive-led Agile transformation. The first one, first retrospective type, Agile 4 Values Retrospective. Following group sprint review, or the closest to that if the organization is not yet running Scrum to make work visible, the coalition of leaders that will be leading the Agile transformation are asked to write what in their organization's policies support and hinder each of the 4 Agile values. After reading or sharing all of the responses, the teams are asked to propose one change they can make to the company written policy that week that will improve a plus or reduce a minus. This becomes the initial backlog for the leadership coalition implementing the Agile transformation. Okay, the language I'm using here is really top down. The reason for that is I have a lot of clients that are huge legacy top-down companies that need more speed. They're dying and they have huge amounts of cash and huge amounts of cash reserves, but it's not growing and it's shrinking. So on a long horizon, well, some of them not that long, they're dying. So this section, I am using language like I would use in those companies where there's a leadership coalition from a leadership group and they hold the reins to financing. They're the only people who can update company policy. Now, you can absolutely have a completely flat organization and do all of these things. For example, if you have 5 like-minded friends, maybe you all took the Scrum Master class together and the Agile Hardware Developer class together and the Product Owner class together, and you have all shared vocabulary and you see eye to eye, and you do a lean coffee format on, or some of the exercises from the Product Owner class on how to develop and narrow down and refine your product and its personas. Then each of the 5 of you puts in an equal amount of cash, some amount of money from your savings. That now is, as of that date, the total company value, and you each have 1/5 of the company's shares. And you incorporate that day legally, elect someone to be the president, someone to be the secretary, someone to be the treasurer, and likely you rotate who plays those roles each product release or sprint. In that case, you are the leadership coalition and you are the owners. Now you can do that with any size. I said 5 people, maybe that helps some of us imagine it. You could do that with 5,000 people. You could do it online through a GoFundMe. And people, those are the initial owners. Then you can redistribute shares based on value delivered with value-based delivery, like we talked about in the sprint review section. For more on that, we can have a Q&A. You can tweet at me at Joe Justice. That'd probably need to be a follow-up book because that goes way beyond the 353 of Scrum. But the point I'm trying to make here is you can be 100% flat with no leadership group, no leadership coalition, and everyone having funding authority, which is closer to what Tesla is, and do all these retrospectives. But the language here is for the majority of my clients, the companies who need the most help. So I am talking about a leadership group, a leadership coalition, funding being held by this leadership group, and only they can update policy. The goal here is to change company policy to be amplifying agility or simply not preventing agility from spontaneously, easily, and comfortably emerging. And by agility, I mean fast release with high quality and happy people. I have a graphic here of the Agile 4 Values retrospective, where in this case, the leadership team can put post-it notes of what company policies are amplifying each of these 4 Agile values and which company policies are dampening or blocking these 4 Agile values. Then they create an action card of what they'll do next in that week. And I asked them to commit to do it that week to update company policy to make that change. Then that's their sprint review to the company to say, here's this policy we changed. And they announce that. Agile 12 Principles retrospective is this next step, the next retrospective type. The Agile 12 Principles retrospective is identical to the Agile 4 Values retrospective, but given a much finer filter and some more important additional scope. The Agile 12 Principles retrospective encapsulates some of the architectural technical practices, funding practices, cadence of business and technical collaboration, performance management, and more broadly addresses the issues of speed of iteration across the organization. Joe Justice will implement this after the first round of policy changes have been made and trained throughout the organization from the Agile 4 Values retrospective. Now, in all of these, because I work with hardware companies often, I've removed the word software and replaced it with product or customer visible value. Then the Agile 4 Values, Agile 12 Principles work for every company, every type of business. Retrospective type 3, Speedboat retrospective. This version of the Speedboat retrospective is a modification by Joe Justice of the Sailboat retrospective to amplify the limbic response and amplify a desire or preference towards speed. while building in some playful elements to trigger the creative and less judgmental human brain cocktail of oxytocin and serotonin. If there is only time to practice one retrospective during the Scrum Master seminar, Joe Justice chooses this one. The reason being it discovers potential process improvements for both flow of product development and manufacture, but also morale. So this retrospective type, in a relatively comfortable way, discovers if there's a blocking issue to speed, an impediment towards speed and quality and happiness that is a personal problem, or a logistics problem, or a factory floor problem, or a software or a process problem. And that's pretty hard to do, because many times an issue that is slowing down the team is a personality conflict or a personnel issue. This retrospective will bring that up at the same level as anything else that slowed the team down to that same amount of slowdown, which could have been a technical issue or a process issue. And it does it in a relatively relaxing and playful and disarming way, which makes it not tend to blow up. So I find this very valuable. It simply says, what's preventing us from being faster regardless of source? And it does it in a fairly comfortable way. Here, I'll show it to you. First, the facilitator, usually the Scrum Master, identifies the scope of the retrospective. If it is the first retrospective for an organization new to Scrum, the likely scope is, how do we feel about our last release? For teams already iterating on improving their company flow and psychological safety using agile methods, the scope is often the last release, which is a sprint, or the last sprint if releases are not yet small enough to fit inside sprints, or the way we are working as a Scrum team, or a specific event like a change in funding model or cancellation of a large customer contract. Those all could be events that would trigger a retrospective on that scope. The scope of the retrospective is written on the whiteboard, real or virtual. Next, the facilitator draws a waterline across the middle of the whiteboard. Next, the facilitator draws a y-axis, top being happy and fast, the bottom of the y-axis being not happy or less happy and slow. Next, the facilitator draws a speeding speedboat, tipped back and shooting a spray of water high in the air from its speed. The facilitator draws stick figures, one for each participant in the retrospective. The facilitator draws the stick figures' hands waving in the air as if they're saying "wee" along the speedboat ride. The facilitator then asks each participant what their favorite party beverage may be, and attempts to draw that beverage in the stick figure's hand. We have seen martinis, beers, wine glasses, and many more. And this step is intentionally playful to prepare the brain with oxytocin and serotonin ahead of the main activity. But all is not perfect. There is an anchor dragging behind the boat, slowing it down, and rocks to dodge. So here's the anchor behind the boat. Here's the rocks to dodge, and here's some glasses in their hands. You can even draw a sun, and that's what is increasing the happiness for the team. Wind, what is making us even faster. The island, the goal. Is the goal clear? Do we know what it is? Are we going towards the goal, or are we missing the goal? You can add elements if you think, as a Scrum Master or whoever's facilitating this, if they're useful to uncover the top priority process improvement. The participants are asked to write down anything memorable that happened during the scope of the retrospective. So for example, the last sprint, and place these cards higher up towards the sun and sky if the event improved happiness and or speed. The cards are placed further down if the remembered event made the scope of the retrospective less happy or slower. Cards placed on the waterline are neutral. In this way, a gradient of impact to speed or morale is established. The facilitator encourages a peaceful and a little playful mood to keep the serotonin and oxytocin coming, which heads off conflict and makes the conflict that may still arise less deeply emotional sabotaging to the participants. This soothing makes it more likely the team will reach a positive process improvement. The time for writing and posting of cards is limited by what the facilitator believes is the right timing to arrive at the highest business impact process improvement. We do not want to take so long that the oxytocin and serotonin, good, calm feeling, may have worn off and be replaced with frustration or boredom, which will make potential conflict resolution much more difficult. An effective strategy here is called the popcorn method. Popcorn is done when the popping slows down, not when the last kernel pops. If we waited until the last kernel pops, the majority of the already popped kernels would burn. Using this analogy, when the pace of writing cards slows down, even though some people are still writing, a skillful facilitator can begin bringing the participants' attention back to the retrospective board and away from writing. The next step is used in every retrospective of all types. It is called unpacking the retrospective. Here, the facilitator reads or shares all of the cards to create shared understanding. Up until this point, participants only know the cards they themselves wrote. Now we have a shared context across all the participants and facilitator. Unpacking the retrospective always starts with the positives first, from the very top of the y-axis. As these cards are read, similar cards are grouped together on the x-axis without altering their y-axis position. Participants then dot vote on the card they most want to do something about, to make good things happen more often, or for a wider group, to happen more often, or for a wider group, or negative things they want to dampen or reduce. Now that shared context has been created, the facilitator invites team members to write new cards, proposing a process improvement the people participating in this retrospective could reasonably accomplish within the next sprint. These are placed on the board or next to the board and dot voted on by business impact. By dot voting, the team chooses the top business impact card. The choice is limited to cards the participants believe they themselves are likely to accomplish in the next sprint. This selected card is put into a Scrum team's backlog or brought to Metascrum to find a product owner to take it on. If the card is brought to Metascrum, the person presenting the card in Metascrum will solicit the entire attending group to determine where the best place for this card may be and to improve the card via their refinement. Next retrospective type, timeline retrospective. The facilitator draws and labels an x-axis timeline to define the scope of the retrospective. Participants are then asked to write memorable cards and place them on the timeline. The facilitator then reads all cards aloud to unpack the retrospective. Team members dot vote, write a process improvement, and then put the process improvement in the backlog for the next sprint, or call Metascrum to find a team or team of teams to execute the card. This retrospective is best used when the facilitator, usually a Scrum Master, observes an impediment, but quite some time has passed. Due to recency bias, the Scrum Master may worry. Many of the retrospective participants will not be thinking about that impediment anymore, or won't realize it is actually a higher business impact impediment or opportunity than more recent events. The scope of the timeline is intentionally chosen to include the time the suspected opportunity occurred and to set the context of the opportunity's importance. This creates team buy-in, that this is really an opportunity, and highlights that this is the top priority opportunity. So for example, it might be the last release, and maybe the last release took 4 weeks. So there'd be a 4-week long x-axis with weeks labeled and maybe even days, but at least weeks. And the Scrum Master might seed the timeline to help remember things. They might put, there was a company holiday on this day. And people say, oh, I remember that. And then remember we had fire alarm testing and left the office. Or if we're remote, remember Miro was down in the afternoon on this day. Oh, I remember that. So now we have some context, some memory context. And then the Scrum Master will say, put anything you remember, anything memorable on the timeline. People will put things like, remember we went to happy hour together. Remember, we got new software licenses here. Our intern left. Oh, I remember that. And they'll put things. And hopefully the impediment the Scrum Master was fishing for which the Scrum Master was fishing, will be placed by someone. But the Scrum Master then just simply reads them all aloud without bias and sees if that impediment or process improvement elicits more reaction from the people who actually did the work than the other items. And if not, the Scrum Master learns. Maybe that wasn't the top priority impediment. Maybe they misunderstood. So the Scrum Master isn't trying to manipulate the team. They're trying to learn from the team as well. But they are trying to make sure the scope encompasses what the Scrum Master thinks is the top priority problem. So the Scrum Master can check themselves and they can suggest indirectly what could be the problem. Then the teams dot vote, they find the process improvement card, the card they want to improve, they write a process improvement card, and either they themselves execute it if they can, or they bring it to Metascrum to find someone who can. Last retrospective type, plus delta retrospective. This is the simplest of the formats in our retrospective set and is good to use when pressed for time or when the highest business value impediment or opportunity is fairly well understood. The facilitator draws two columns, plus and delta. The facilitator then writes the scope of the retrospective as the title. For example, our most recent sprint review with the customer. So that'd be the scope. What happened there that was good? What happened there that was the gap between what we want and good? The participants write cards, place them in the retrospective columns, and the facilitator reads them aloud, plus column first. Then the facilitator adds a third column, experiment. The participants are invited to write any process improvements they wish, and the participants dot vote on which process improvements they will implement during the next sprint. Note the second column is not minus, but delta. This is explained as the delta or gap between what happened and what we would have wished. This subtle word choice generates different and more actionable backlog than saying minus or what went badly or bad. Since the success of our retrospective is actionable process improvements, we recommend this subtle but specific word choice. Oh, this is actually a higher level. I need to fix the font here. Happiness metric retrospective. We'll address this momentarily, but first, let's see how to measure the impact of the retrospective. Measuring the, let's check. Do I then have a header for happiness metric retrospective? Nope. I don't have a header, so I should change that header. Measuring the impact of the retrospective. A Scrum Master intentionally avoids spreadsheet accounting, or the myth that a skills matrix or work breakdown structure can accurately model a system of humans, for the reasons given in Chapter 5, where. For this reason, estimates are always referred as trends. Referred to as trends. Predictions of release are made to the nearest sprint at the tightest. Showing improvement trends while avoiding artificial precision is helpful for building team morale and buy-in to the inspect and adapt scientific process as introduced in Chapter 2, Goal. This also helps us identify process improvements that did not work or even harmed performance. And this educates participants in future retrospectives, allowing the process improvement proposal and selection skills to improve. We measure the acceleration from the moment the process improvement project met its definition of done. If the sprint of overall project completion does not improve, if the speed of overall project completion does not improve, we have failed. Wait, the retrospective is to choose a process improvement for speed or happiness. Does this mean a process improvement that only improves happiness has failed? The most enrolled course at Harvard, as of this writing, is about happiness. And the faculty have published a book of their findings called Happier, which we recommend. First, they define happiness with 4 categories. First, healthy, sustainable happiness. which is the type of happiness we were referring to as Scrum Masters interested in organizational improvement for speed of iteration. This is happiness that comes from healthy improvements and is able to be sustained. Second type of happiness, unhealthy, non-sustainable happiness. The authors of Happier compare this to a junk food burger. It might taste good, but lowers energy to digest and possibly leads to health problems. Third type of happiness, nihilism, where participants don't even believe there is a thing called happiness. And that is not what we are talking about here. Fourth type, delayed happiness, where if we just work harder now, we can earn the privilege to experience happiness later, which the authors make a case is not the goal either. This is what we'd call the rat race. Work hard now, even if you're really unhappy, and that will create future happiness. That's not the type we're focusing on here. For the happiness retrospective, we're focusing on type 1, healthy, sustainable happiness. If our definition of happiness is healthy, sustainable happiness, some interesting data is useful to us. Harvard faculty presented studies tracked that increasing this type of happiness increases business performance. I think I could write that more smoothly. For their data sets, we do recommend reading the book Happier, Learn the Secrets to Daily Joy and Lasting Fulfillment by Tal Ben-Shahar. If this data set is correct, it suggests that by increasing healthy, sustainable happiness, the speed of product iteration, velocity, will increase. And that is exactly what we are observing in the market. For evidence from Joe Justice's work, please see the Harvard Business Review article titled Why John Deere Measures Employee Happiness Every 2 Weeks. This means that if we successfully increase happiness or speed, speed will increase. In both cases, speed of delivery, velocity of entire extra small projects will increase. If velocity does not increase after a process improvement meets its definition of done, it means we either did not actually fix the problem or we chose a faulty process improvement. And this is why we can measure, and bonus, the effect of whomever is currently playing the Scrum Master role based on velocity increase. This point is super important. The reason we would pay someone's salary to be a Scrum Master is because our next delivery should be faster, and our next delivery, and every delivery sustainably after that. And the reason that's a reasonable expectation is because of research like Harvard's saying, if employee morale goes up and stays up in a healthy, sustainable way, speed of delivery and quality also increase. And as impediments are removed, like technical issues or not helpful approval escalations, as those are removed and our value stream map becomes more direct, speed of release accelerates. These are our Scrum Master's job. In fact, this is the area of our Scrum Master's expertise. So this is why a company would want to pay a Scrum Master's salary. And this is why a company can choose to bonus a Scrum Master, to give them more money or stock or cheers or ice cream or whatever's good if speed goes up, sustainable speed with quality. And by speed, I mean release, product release, extra small project release. This also means that running a retrospective is a recommended and powerful business performance driver to run a retrospective simply to improve happiness directly. Okay, that's not written smoothly. What I'm saying here is retrospectives can speed up companies and increase happiness and for business reasons. Now, back to the happiness metric retrospective. This is probably where I should introduce the title. Participants are asked to visibly report to the group how happy they are related to a given scope, or how happy they were over the timeline set for the retrospective. Reports are to be done on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 meaning they could not possibly be happier, and 1 being they had no happiness at all. These measures have been tracked when taken both publicly and anonymously. The non-anonymously reported happiness metrics are artificially high, 1 to 2 points higher than when reported anonymously. However, anonymous happiness metrics are less actionable as we don't know who is needing support. At John Deere, a previous client of mine, one team member reported low happiness sprint after sprint, but offered no process improvement. The team didn't know how to help, and all the team happiness and velocity began to reduce. The retrospectives were anonymous at this point. They didn't know which team member was so unhappy, and the team member didn't write down a process improvement, and it was anonymous. So they only knew someone on our team is super unhappy and not getting happier. And that started to affect everyone else's happiness. All the happiness scores started to go down. They wanted the team to be successful and feel successful. The team didn't know how to help, and all team happiness and velocity began to reduce. The Scrum Master, in an act of desperation, conducted the next happiness metric retrospective publicly. The unhappy person revealed themselves, and the team together swarmed to carefully and respectfully understand the cause of the unhappiness and take immediate steps to try to improve it. Team happiness across the board and velocity immediately improved. So everyone's happiness went up and the speed of the team went up when they started running the happiness retrospective publicly, not secretly, not anonymously. For this reason, and many other clients experiencing the same phenomenon, we recommend not conducting the happiness metric retrospective anonymously. Tracking happiness this way allows us to attempt systemic improvement of happiness. The attention to happiness is often rewarded by increases in self-reported employee engagement and happiness and talent retention. Furthermore, the areas of the company running the happiness metric retrospective are chosen as more desirable places to work inside large firms than areas which do not. Again, for more data on this, we recommend the Harvard Business Review article, Why John Deere Measures Employee Happiness Every 2 Weeks. The certified Scrum Master in that article, George Tome, later went on to train and create the Agile team that landed the largest financial success and sale in company history. George attributes that record win as being only possible because of the speed of iteration the team obtained. To complete this picture, as this is a master class, all team members in these cases were trained as Scrum Masters, and George attended all of the trainings for all staff, taking notes, practicing in multiple teams in multiple geographies, and using scientific method to test and learn the organizational change approach that improved speed of iteration in their business the most. In short, let me add here, George Tome is a ninja. George is an ex-military doctor, respiratory illnesses, like getting shot through the lungs, like that type of thing, or fragments, shrapnel in the lungs. George would be a field doc for the military dealing with these situations before entering John Deere. And George was used to filing experimental reports on what is saving people's lives, what is making them live longer, what is giving them higher quality of life, and doing this systemically, scientific method. George took that same rigor to Agile, and he calls it XI, extreme innovation, and it's phenomenal. If you want to go deep, George is a great person to follow on Twitter or even Instagram and go deep and read any of George's publications. This one made it into Harvard, Why John Deere Measures Employee Morale Every 2 Weeks, which unfortunately is all about my work, and they didn't put my name in the piece. Yeah, that is awful. Some people don't give credit. But let me at least here on my podium talk about how awesome George Tome is. He is. In summary, a retrospective is held in the least amount of time needed to identify the top business impact opportunity. These opportunities are limited to only those that can be addressed by process improvement within the next sprint. That process improvement is then clearly described as real work with a definition of done, and sprint planning or meta-scrum are facilitated to find the team or teams backlog where the process improvement will be placed. A successful process improvement will increase velocity. Closing words. If process improvements, also called Kaizen or good change, which means good change in Japanese, The home of the Toyota production system and lean discipline. Wow, that is a clumsy sentence. Sorry. So process improvements can be called a Kaizen, which does mean good change approximately in Japanese. And Japanese is the home of the Toyota production system and lean discipline. That's one thought. Next, if the process improvement doesn't improve velocity, or the velocity improvements are not known to the participants of the retrospective, interest in participation in retrospectives will decrease. What I'm trying to say here is if you don't execute a process improvement after retrospective, and you don't, as a Scrum Master or facilitator, don't report back if it worked, the team is going to become less and less interested in running retrospectives. And they may give up on them entirely and say, I don't want to do them, and stop. The recipe to keep your team engaged in retrospectives is to show which retrospectives increased velocity and which didn't. This makes the team feel they're connected to the race car that is the team's speed. They understand they are holding the steering wheel, well, really the accelerator pedal to speed, which is process improvement, which is Kaizen, which is good change from the retrospective. So you have to show the team, we were averaging 50 points a sprint the last 10 sprints. We made this process improvement. We automated these 3 key tests that used to be manual, and now they're automated. And we got 70 points done this sprint. Let's see if it stays up 70 points next sprint. The team feels excited. They say, okay, so a process improvement of that type works. And they now want to participate in retrospective, usually. Let me highlight that too, because probably all of that needs to be rewritten to be more clear. If retrospectives are being skipped or have low energy, the Scrum Master is recommended to first back calculate if previous retrospectives resulted in velocity increase and attempt to fix the root cause if velocity did not improve. If velocity is not known or tracked, the Scrum Master does not yet need to facilitate a retrospective. They know the first priority for scientific method is to make the results of experimentation visible to be inspected. So their first job is to make velocity visible. You don't need to host a retrospective to know that you need to make velocity visible. So do that first, then host a retrospective. Like a race car that we want to go faster around the track, we need to first know our lap time before we begin to experiment to improve the lap time. Otherwise, the team simply becomes frustrated and the project is abandoned. Well, or at least the retrospective is abandoned. At this point, it is likely the end of sprint 3, and the team is about to break for lunch. If lunch did not happen during sprint 3, it is a good time for a break, if it's not the lunchtime, and then for the teams to perform Scrum Rotate to launch sprint 4. You can see an example burned down here of 2 different teams finishing sprint 3, 2 different classes finishing sprint 3.